Welcome to Public Affairs Roundtable, a discussion of current events in the nation and around the world and how they affect the people of Indiana. Here's your moderator, Larry Lough.
The book is called Swept Away: Why Women Fear Their Own Sexuality. Today on Public Affairs Roundtable, a program usually of economics and politics, some analysis, we'll be talking about some other things today. This being Valentine's Day weekend, we'll talk about sex and about love. Our panelists today are the author of Swept Away, Carol Cassell, Ph.D., an expert on human sexuality, and president of the American Association of Sex Educators. Also with us, Jane Duckworth, a sex therapist and marriage counselor who's a professor of counseling psychology at Ball State University, and our executive producer, John Rouse, a member of the political science faculty here at Ball State. John, this is something of a departure for Public Affairs Roundtable, where we're into political and economic analysis. We're now into love and sex. Where does it fit in?
Well, it is certainly something new in a way for the program, but it's very much online in terms of what the program is about, because we do focus upon culture. And if we go back and look at what President Reagan said when Mr. Gorbachev came to our country, he said that our country is a nation of faith and family, not just supermarkets. So as we look at the 14th of February, as we look at the structure of the family, because the family is changing, and the family, of course, is based upon love and also sex. So the structure of economics in our country even. If we're going to send people off to war, people, not just men but females too, it is based upon the family and the structure of the family, the economics of the family. So this is a program of culture and economics and politics. And there's even politics between husband and wife, or between spouses, girlfriend, boyfriend. So politics is at the heart of this.
Romance is at the heart of Valentine's Day, Carol. Where does the problem or the concept of being swept away enter into Valentine's Day?
Well, the problem is the falseness of the illusion of romance. Unfortunately, we still teach little girls that someday their prince will come, and I guess he'll give them a kiss, and that makes life wonderful. So there's an expectation that is never met. Women are constantly thinking that the one man in their life should have been maybe somebody else. And what I mean when I say swept away, I'm talking about that false sense of romance, that a man will come along, sweep us up, and take us away from all the hard stuff of life. So why should we major in math? What about computers? Why should we go to medical school when we can marry doctors? And women are not preparing for their future at all because they're counting on that prince to sweep them off their feet.
You say in the book there is no Mr. Right, and women ought to realize that.
There's a lot of Mr. Rights. There's a right kind of guy, there's a different kind of guy, but there's not this model of perfection that this particular man will come along and really want to save you from having to take care of yourself in life. It's not that women wake up in the morning and they say, by 10 o'clock today I'll be swept away by this wonderful man. But young girls build their life on the idea that they'll be swept off their feet.
Jane, what do you find when young couples come to you with this kind of problem, that there seems to be something wrong with the relationship?
Okay. I think they're both feeling, I wanted swept away and didn't get it. And sometimes it's the man as well as the woman. To me, the swept away phenomena, which I do see with college-age students a lot, becomes more reality-based as people actually get into doing the job of living with each other. And so sometimes it's the man, sometimes it's the woman. I do think men have their version of swept away. This little woman is going to take care of me, she's going to meet all of my needs, which is just as ridiculous as the prince coming down and taking care of me. I don't have to learn to cook, I don't have to learn to sew, I don't have to learn to do this. And now, indeed, they do have to do some sharing. And I think it's the correction of illusions that people are going through frequently with their marriage counseling. Where's reality? What do I really want? What can I really give? Those are all things that come to the fore, I think.
You know, let me get back to economics, because, may I ask both Carol and Jane, economics in the sense, Carol, that the for example, about 30% of all medical doctors are now female. About 25 to 30% of all lawyers are now female. Isn't the economics of this changing this concept of swept away? And Jane, economics, of course, in terms of the relationship between two people is always an issue in terms of how they share economics. So isn't economics in this?
There's a lot of economic. First of all, there's a great investment in having women sort of be starry-eyed about this notion that somebody will come along and take care of them forever. There's more money spent in cosmetics than there is in public education in this country. There is an incredible amount of money spent on romantic novels that feed into the swept away notion. If you think about it, the primetime television shows, the soap operas, Dallas and so forth, the whole notion is this whole kind of battle of the sexes and the notion of women that won't have to take care of the hard stuff of life. But the cold, harsh economics is that things have changed. And a woman today cannot count on being taken care of for the rest of her life by a man. There's divorce. It takes how much money to buy a house today? What's the percentage of the average couple's income? Most men today can't afford a traditional wife.
Very true. Very
Now, in terms of the problems that you see in counseling, I would think that economics in terms of who does what, for example, women have the complaint that even though they work all day long, they have to come home and still take care of the house.
They have 1.5 or 2 jobs, and I think the complaint is my husband still only has 1, and I have 2. It is true. I don't know very many families that can get along with just one breadwinner. And that's an economic reality. It also is affecting the way we have to deal with children and so forth. And the current problem that I see many women dealing with is how do I balance my expectations of what I want to do with my children, with my husband, with my family, and the economic realities of what I want out of a personal fulfillment in a job and what I have to get in the way of a job.
See, we're still raising men, just the way men were raised in the 50s. And we're not even, we're raising men, we used to raise them for the 80s in that mode, now it's going to be the 90s. But most mothers don't raise little boys saying, now when you grow up you'll have to, here's how to cook, here's how you chop things up, because someday you have to learn to do all of these things. But the issue of women having 1.5 jobs and men having 1, to some degree I had my eyes opened on this issue because I'm doing another book now and talking about marriage. And I didn't realize that some women know nothing about the finances of the family, because you see, princes will take care of those things. Well, why should I have to think about insurance and whether this is tenants in common or joint tenants? And women deliberately, again, part of the mythology that they don't have to deal with these things, men become the financial advisor. They're the ones that take care of the automobile. They fix the air conditioner. Most American women, you open up the hood of the car and they go, oh my. So I think that there's something to be said about men having 1.5-time jobs too, only they do the garbage and the gardening, and they take care of the finances. So I think that both of them are taking 1.5 jobs.
Society is obviously not teaching reality then. Television is not reality. Cosmetic ads aren't reality. Harlequin romances aren't reality. Whose job is it then? Where does it start? In the home?
Well, what's reality anyway? We don't really know, do we? I mean, our ideas of what the traditional American family came right out of the black and white Philco sets of the 50s. When somewhere up there in TV land, they decided to tell us that an American family is a man that sort of bumbles his way around, but by the end of the 30 minutes he will have wisdom for us all, and that women manipulate men to get new hats. And we decided that was the great American family. And we have Leave It to Beaver and I Love Lucy, and we could sit here and name all of them. So that's our notion of what the American family is like. Today, it's sort of 30-something. I think now is the new idea that that's what the American family is like. But the fact of the matter, it's a little bit of all of that reality. It's a little bit of Harlequin romance, and it's a little bit of the Cosby Show, and it's a little bit of the, you go around once in life kind of thing. But there's really no set idea in my mind. In other words, it's a mosaic, and so all of it reflects somebody's reality.
But if you take television's inability to deal with birth control, for example.
That's a good issue, actually.
It's not really dealing with reality.
Well, but I think the whole thing is so funny when you talk about the whole subject of contraception. The United States is still lingering somewhere in the 1900s on the topics. According to different polls, and you always have to look at research with a little bit of, but around 87% of all married couples use contraception consistently. If they didn't, they would have many, many children. So something's happening here, you know. Even among such religious faiths, take Roman Catholic. It was quite the norm for a Roman Catholic couple to have anywhere between 5 and 6 children in the mid-50s. It was not considered unusual at all. That's not true today. It's around 3 children. So every religious faith, everybody's using contraception. And yet we go, oh, we can't talk about that in public. Oh, NBC wouldn't even consider, ABC, CBS, putting ads on television. Go across the ocean. It's not unusual. If you're in France, you turn on the television set, and there's an ad for contraception. It's our lingering notions of Victorian morality.
You know, and the way we settle all this, of course, is through politics. And of course, this is a very political year. Pat Robertson, of course, one of his big focuses on social issues and a definition of the family. As I read him, he says that we should have more people, not less people, because we need to be able to be competitive with the rest of the world, because the rest of the world is overpopulated, so therefore we should be more populated. Yes, yeah. And so this whole issue of Valentine's Day, the theme there, and then love and sex, it's a very dynamic kind of thing. For example, according to a Lou Harris survey, for example, last year there was 65,000 sexual references during the year on the commercial networks. That comes down to something like 27 references to sex within 1 hour. So you have this front-end kind of emphasis upon sex and Dallas and all of this, but yet there's no emphasis upon the responsibility of all this. Is this part of what you're saying?
Well, I always wonder about the person that counted all of that, but that's another issue. Well,
it's a dirty job, but somebody has to do it.
I thought that was so bizarre when I read that same thing. Okay. But the reason there is so much reference on television, on commercial television, about sex, sexual desire, sexual disaster, is because people are interested in it. That's why it is there. But on the other balance on it, if you look at some of the other things about it, you're talking about there's sort of the greater good issues about couples and family. There's obviously Family Ties, The Cosby Show, which are the most popular shows, by the way. Frank's Place, it shows a strong relationship. L.A. Law, there's many strong, very sensitive relationships on these shows. So I say to brush television with some kind of awful hedonistic brush is off base. They show some of it because that's what keeps our attention, and I think there's a counterbalance of other kinds of things.
But isn't, in a way, birth control is becoming an issue with the emphasis upon Pat Robertson's campaign?
Well, let's be clear about Pat Robertson's campaign, okay? He wants to return back to the mythical world of Leave It to Beaver. When he talks about traditional family values, he's talking about a mommy, a daddy, a great big kitchen, and the woman stays in the kitchen under house arrest, more or less, and that there's these 2 perfect children. He has no tolerance at all for the mixture of families where you find 2 people by death or divorce have now blended a family together, or a single woman raising a child alone.
Or a single man raising a child.
Or multiracial families. He isn't. That's not when he's talking about this great traditional value.
And that perception seemingly does not fit economic reality.
It doesn't fit in reality.
Desire. I don't think that's desire. I think that there is a significant number of Americans who choose not to have children of their own, who choose to adopt or choose never to have children. Are they a lesser person because of that? There's going to be families with 3 kids, with 2 kids. There's lots of mixtures of the way people choose their life. But I'm bothered by this mythical family notion that he has. The other thing that I'm quite bothered is his notion that women somehow owe it to society to produce more children. Now, I heard him speak. There is a whole thought, as you know, which you mentioned actually, it's called the birth dearth, that the United States will be run over by Soviet Russia if we don't produce more children to work in the factories of America. And as I sat there, I got a cold chill because I read the original works of Comstock at the turn of the century, and he said, Comstock, the famous Comstock laws, by the way, in the 20s, forbid information about contraceptive devices to enter the United States. In fact, there was a shipment of diaphragms, and the woman, Margaret Sanger, that was bringing them into the United States was arrested and thrown into prison. At the same time, all over a civilized nation, it was considered quite the thing. So that, in the Comstock laws, I hear that in Pat Robinson's talk and others like him. They want more children because it's cheap labor. And I think we have to look at the immorality of that.
What do we teach children? What should we teach children today about sex and relationships?
I think we take mutual respect for each other. We don't allow boys to disdain girls the way we do and say things, she's just a girl, you know. And we try to teach girls that boys are more than boyfriends. Like, to get a boyfriend and Gloria Vanderbilt genes are on about the same level with girls. And to take a look at the differences in the genders, and there are differences between males and females, and the similarities. In the sense that sex is a natural function, because that's the way, and I don't know why this has to be startling news, that we reproduce. This is how the species survives, through reproduction. So we tell them the basic facts about the scientific and the physical side of reproduction, and then we should talk about the emotions involved.
Jane, you know, it seems so far we've talked about some of the front-end dynamics, I might call it, the sexual aspects. Let's take a look at the real application of love. The couples that come to you, what kinds of problems do they have?
I think many people assume people come because of love, or because of sex, or because of money. And indeed, what it turns out to be is a variation of love, which is mutual respect. The other person isn't taking into consideration something that is very, very important to the person who's making the complaint. It's either being ignored, it's being negated, it's being said that that's not important, and the other person finally says, this isn't worth it. I just can't live with somebody who ignores me as a person, regardless of how great a sex life they have, how much money they have. They just say, I am more worthwhile than what they seem to be indicating. And that's what either brings them in a last-ditch effort. Sometimes a person has said they're going to leave, and the other person says, oh, I didn't realize you meant this. Oh, well, let's go for marriage counseling. And sometimes a person says, no, you know, you've waited too long. I don't trust that if we go, you will make any changes, because I've tried and tried and tried. I see that with the sex therapy, that one person has become dysfunctional. Usually it's the man's issue that will bring people in rather than the woman's issue. The husband has said it's not important. I think it is very important to him, but he's worried about what he'll find out if he goes. The woman has said, look, you know, you don't have to cut out all affection just because you're not functioning sexually. And he says, but in essence, I have to. And they get into non-talking, non-communication of a number of areas, and they're basically roommates in the same situation. And then one will say, I'm going to leave. There's more to life than this. I can't imagine this for the rest of my life.
Do you think there's somewhat, again, back to this sort of terrible romantic notion that Americans have been fed for so long? I looked at the structures of relationships, say, in the 30s and the 40s. There was no idea that you get married and this person's going to be your best friend, your everything, your buddy. The whole ball of wax was not supposed to be in your mate. You kept your friends and you had your family and you did other things. And you wanted a good, sexy mate to grow old with the idea they were going to amuse you and be everything in your life.
I think
find
that's
that
part of it,
startling assumption.
And very unrealistic.
Well, you know, since 1962, when the birth control pill really came, so everybody says we've had a revolution. A couple of questions.
We had a little revolt. We had a revolt.
Okay, that was what I was going to ask you about. And the second kind of question gets back to that economic underpinning, and that is, are women more free now, whatever that means, than they were 25 years ago?
It depends. Let's start out. Are they freer to have the choice to have sex before marriage today than they were 25 years ago? You bet. They certainly are. And what was the influence of the birth control pill? A lot. Because if you look at 1965, Ira Reese is one of the big researchers in the field. He began to look at the number of college students who said that they'd had sex at least once. And the curve just starts looking like a temperature chart, and you begin to see that rising from that period. I think there's a lot more choice for women. We don't stone them anymore, and we don't tell them they're not marriage material if they don't retain their virginity. So I think that issue is true. The second issue, and that has to do with employment. Single women have always been employed. That's never an issue. I don't know why we fuss about that. Of course single women have been employed. Poor women have always been employed. They cleaned the houses of richer women. So the issue on work has to do with middle-class women. And what we're finding in the greatest pattern of change is this. It used to be, you got married, You got pregnant and you retired from the outside working world if you were middle class. Today's pattern doesn't look like that. You get married and you are a couple for a while. It used to be we had kids within 2 years of marriage, within a year in the 50s. But today's world, there's a period of time as a couple. Then there's a time of when you're home as a mother for a short amount of time. In some cases, you may be home until they're 5 years old, then return to the workforce. But there's all kinds of flipping coins going on, and it's a revolving door for a working mother today. But the big hoopla has to do with the issue of middle-class mothers going back to work, not women working.
If I could follow up with Jane, the women are earning more. Sometimes women earn more than their husbands. Does that give them
A
3%?
few times.
3%.
Very few times. Right.
So does that give women in your counseling more of a, because this is a power issue, does that give
bet it
them
is.
more power in terms of vis-a-vis their mates?
I think it does, for the few that does happen too. Women are meeting more men in the workplace and have more opportunities, as men have had for a number of years, of meeting a more desirable person to have a relationship with. Some of them do choose to do that, just like men have done for a number of years. And I think that is a change that I see with this middle class individual. There are more options, and with more options comes more thinking about, do I really want to stay where I am, and more expectations that this relationship, in order for me to stay here, has got to fulfill more of the needs. But there's also the opposite coin. I do see some women saying, I can get needs met outside. I am going to not think traditionally that my husband's got to be everything for me. I've got to stay home, take care of him and the children. I can still have him as a mate, but also have some other things outside, which I think has been a male tradition.
I think women actually have got a real unresolved issue on this notion. If they earn equal money, and very few women do, by the way, still. I mean, maybe in our children's generation, and only 3% of all wives earn more than their husbands, significantly more. But if, now this is the other unresolved. If they earn more money, then in a way they're a little annoyed, because that's not the way the prince is supposed to act. Princes are supposed to earn more money. And if I earn more money, then you're supposed to earn more money. It's supposed to keep moving up the staircase, you see. And deep within the heart of successful women, I've talked to many, and they say, look, I thought when I earned $75,000, that means he would earn $100,000. Instead, he's saying, go for it. Go for it. He's supposed to be running along ahead of me, you know. So that's another problem to work out.
You know, but don't we all continue to get swept away? Male bashing. For example, I think of the cartoon every fall with Peanuts, where Lucy is going to hold the football for Charlie Brown,
Yes,
and Charlie Brown always gets suckered into the thing, and he falls on his bottom, and he becomes a victim again. So aren't we saying, in a sense, that we all become victims because of this unique socialization that we have in our society?
Well, yes and no. I think that women just have more invested in the love issue and that kind of thing. And I see the football sometimes that Lucy's taking away in terms of men say, why don't women talk direct? Why aren't they straight? Why do they say, gee, I'd really like to get to know you better? I call them up and they have some excuse, or I go out with them and we do something together, and then the football gets taken away. She says, well, I'm busy the next time I call. So men see that women give them mixed messages. And they're not sure exactly what women want. What do we want? Do we want a hero? Or do we want a prince? Do we want a partner? What is it, our expectations of men today? And I think it's very muddled.
But Jane, the issue of women are concerned about physical abuse, but males are concerned about psychological abuse or verbal abuse by women. Do you find that in your counseling?
In general, I think so, but I think it can work both ways. I want to throw something in here. I honestly believe women have more possibilities than men allow themselves to have. So while I see the dangers and see that we have problems trying to figure out exactly where we want, I think that's, in my mind, better than not having those probabilities even in my mind, and I think many men don't. And they have, how many men do you know stay home as house husbands? I don't know of any. And I know women have so many more possibilities and choose to use those as an option.
Yeah, for instance, women often say, well, I'm going to take a couple months off. You know, I've worked now for 8 whole years. And I just always think, what would it be like if a man said, well, I'm taking off. I've worked at least 12 years, and I want at least a year out to clean the closets and to go fishing.
Is AIDS changing all this? Is
See,
AIDS
I
going
think
to change the behavior?
Of who? It has changed the behavior of homosexual men. In fact, there's been a decrease in the amount of new AIDS cases amongst homosexual men. There has been a real effect. If you really want to see what can happen when the public health and the private sector gears up on an education program on behavior change, just look at the AIDS model. But the AIDS is growing, as we know, with intravenous drug users, and that's a whole other thing. But in the average heterosexual community, the incidence of AIDS is very, very low. What it has changed is there certainly is a lot less brief encounters with strangers. But we saw that happening anyway, even before AIDS.
Be interesting. I have a master's student who's going to be surveying our group, which tends to be a little bit more conservative than colleges in the East and the West, to find out if their perceptions are that they are changing their own sexuality practices because of AIDS. We'll just see, at least in self-report, what.
Well, some college campuses say that kids say yes, that they're very aware of AIDS, but they don't change in their personal behavior. Nothing has changed in the last 2 years.
I'm sorry, we're short on time. There are about 50 more questions I'd like to ask. We'll have to save it for another time. Thanks to our panelists, Jane Duckworth from Ball State, professor of counseling psychology, sex therapist, and marriage counselor. Carol Cassell, author of the book Swept Away, Why Women Fear Their Own Sexuality, and a new book that will be called
More Sassy Women.
More Sassy Women. Thank you, John Rouse. I'm Larry Lough. Thank you for joining us.
If you have comments regarding this program, please address them to John Rouse, Box 149, Muncie, Indiana, 47305. The producer for Public Affairs Roundtable is John Rouse. Associate producers are Mike Seaborg, Bill Mosier, Nancy Carlson, and Steve Johnson. This program is a production of University Media Services and the Department of Political Science. Facilities and funding are provided by University Media Services on the campus of Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana.